with those who come into your society? Why is the pressure always on us, the problem people? Why don't we say to more white people, integrate better, especially in those areas?
They haven't chosen to move to another country.
The debate surrounding migration and integration in the UK has always been a contentious one, but the heated exchange in this particular discussion brought some deeply ingrained beliefs to the surface. One of the most provocative statements came from a migrant, who boldly suggested that the responsibility for integration should lie not only with the newcomers, but also with the white British population. This idea, challenging the traditional notion that immigrants must adapt to the culture of their host country, struck a chord with many, provoking an intense reaction from those on the panel. The migrant argued that the pressure of integration should not be solely on those coming into the country, but should also be a shared responsibility with the indigenous population, particularly in areas where large numbers of migrants have settled. She suggested that white Brits should take the initiative to better integrate into the society and communities that have been shaped by migration. Her remarks were surprising as they challenged the conventional wisdom surrounding migration, where the burden of cultural adaptation often falls heavily on the shoulders of the migrants. This suggestion turned the tables, calling for a rethinking of the dynamic of integration in multicultural societies. The assertion raised questions about the expectations of both the migrant communities and the native population when it comes to societal cohesion. The speaker's stance on this issue highlighted a broader conversation about what it truly means to integrate into a new society, and whether integration should be seen as a one-sided process or a collaborative effort. Many people in the audience found themselves puzzled by the idea that white British citizens should also bear the responsibility for integrating into migrant communities. However, it's clear that these kinds of discussions are becoming more prevalent in today's debates about immigration, identity, and multiculturalism. The growing diversity in cities like London has brought these issues to the forefront, with both sides of the argument passionately defending their perspectives. The migrants' argument highlighted the complexity of integration in a diverse society, suggesting that it should not be limited to one group alone. The debate became even more intense as others on the panel questioned whether this expectation of mutual integration was fair, or if it was yet another unrealistic expectation placed upon the native population. As the discussion unfolded, it became evident that this issue would continue to be at the heart of conversations about immigration policy and the future of British society. The debate on immigration often sparks strong emotions, and this exchange was no different, particularly when it came to the notion of integration and the responsibilities of both migrant and native populations. A particularly heated moment arose when a migrant guest argued that the white British population should make more effort to integrate into the communities shaped by migration. This was not a typical argument seen in mainstream media, where the focus often lies on immigrants needing to adapt to British society. The migrant's assertion raised eyebrows, challenging the conventional view that immigrants should bear the sole responsibility for cultural assimilation. She made the case that in areas where large numbers of immigrants have settled, particularly in cities like London, the onus of integration should not rest entirely on the shoulders of the newcomers. Instead, she proposed that the native population, particularly white Britons, should be more willing to engage with migrant communities, learn about their cultures, and contribute to a more inclusive society. This argument was controversial, as it turned the traditional narrative upside down. Immigrants, according to many, are expected to adapt to the culture of the host country, learn the language, and adopt the customs. However, by suggesting that the white British should also engage in this process of mutual integration, the migrant guest was advocating for a more inclusive, two-way approach to integration. This approach, she argued, would create stronger bonds between diverse communities, foster mutual understanding, and ultimately build a more cohesive society. The panel quickly erupted into a debate over this assertion, with some expressing confusion and others offering firm rebuttals. Many questioned whether it was fair or reasonable to expect the native population to shoulder such a responsibility. They argued that migrants, having made the conscious choice to come to the UK, should integrate into British society, rather than expecting the opposite. This set the stage for a wider conversation about the challenges of living in a multicultural society and the complexities of integration in an era of mass migration. On one side of the debate there was a call for migrants to adapt and embrace the existing culture, while on the other, the idea of mutual integration was pushed as a way to build a truly inclusive society. The migrants' viewpoint pushed the boundaries of the conversation, forcing many to reconsider their assumptions about how integration should work in a diverse modern Britain. As tensions rose in the debate, it became clear that these kinds of discussions about immigration and cultural integration would continue to shape the future of British society for years to come. The heated discussions surrounding immigration and integration reached a peak when the focus turned to the cultural and social impacts of migration on British society. One of the most contentious issues raised during the debate was the concern that rapid migration and the changing demographics of certain areas were eroding traditional British values and social cohesion. Critics of large-scale immigration argued that the pace of change was too fast for local communities to absorb, leading to divisions and a sense of disconnection. They claimed that areas like London, once quintessentially British, were now increasingly defined by their diversity, which they believed was undermining the cultural fabric of the nation. These critics often pointed to the rise of parallel societies within the UK, where immigrant communities formed tight-knit enclaves and maintained their own customs and languages, rather than fully integrating into British society. For many, this raised concerns about the future of British identity. The idea that British society should remain homogeneous, or that certain aspects of British culture should be preserved, was presented as a defense against what was seen as the overwhelming force of globalization and cultural dilution. This viewpoint holds that the ability to maintain a shared sense of community, common values and social cohesion is vital for the nation's stability and prosperity. The other side of the debate, however, stressed the importance of multiculturalism and the contributions that immigrants make to the country. Supporters of immigration argued that diversity was not a threat but rather a strength. They pointed to the rich cultural tapestry that migrants bring, from cuisine to music, language and traditions, all of which have enriched British society. For them, the increasing cultural diversity reflected the evolving nature of the nation, rather than a decline in its values. They emphasized the role that immigrants played in the UK's economic success, filling gaps in key sectors like healthcare, agriculture and construction. This perspective suggested that immigrants should be celebrated for their contributions, rather than blamed for any challenges in social integration. The reality, they argued, was that integration wasn't just about cultural assimilation, but about fostering mutual respect, understanding and collaboration between communities. While this side acknowledged that integration was a complex issue, they believed it could only succeed if it was approached in a positive, inclusive manner. However, the debate grew more intense as the conversation turned to whether integration was being handled appropriately by both the government and the migrant populations. One argument posited that the government's failure to provide adequate support for integration was a major factor in the struggles some communities faced. Without sufficient resources for language learning, employment opportunities, and social services, it was argued that immigrants often faced barriers to fully participating in society. On the other hand, critics of multicultural policies contended that too much emphasis was placed on preserving distinct cultural identities, rather than encouraging integration into British society. They argued that integration required a shared commitment to British values, including respect for the rule of law, equality, and freedom. As the debate continued, it became clear that immigration, integration, and the future of British identity would remain key issues in shaping the nation's political discourse. While there were strong opinions on both sides, the conversation highlighted the need for a balanced, inclusive approach that could accommodate the complexities of a multicultural society while maintaining the core values that bind it together. As the discussion on immigration and integration unfolded, one of the most significant points raised was the apparent lack of a unified approach to handling the challenges of integration, especially in relation to migrants' integration into British society. Critics argued that while multiculturalism was hailed as a strength, there was a distinct lack of coherent policy and resources aimed at helping immigrants successfully integrate into their new communities. This absence of support led to feelings of isolation and segregation among migrant populations, making it more difficult for them to assimilate into British society. The argument was made that integration was not just the responsibility of immigrants, but also of the government and local communities, who should provide the infrastructure and opportunities necessary to support the process. Proponents of this view stressed that successful integration required a clear commitment from all parties involved, including local councils, the education system, and employers. Language barriers, for example, were highlighted as a significant obstacle to integration. Without access to affordable language classes or support for non-English speakers, immigrants were often left at a disadvantage in terms of employment opportunities, social mobility, and engagement in the wider community. This lack of support, some argued, created a cycle of exclusion, where immigrants remained isolated in their own communities, relying on each other for social support rather than integrating into the larger society. On the other hand, critics of immigration policy argued that the government had placed too much emphasis on integration, without taking into account the pressures it placed on the country's social services, housing, and infrastructure. Some believed that too much focus was placed on providing assistance to immigrants, while the needs of the native population were overlooked. They argued that the increasing number of migrants put an unsustainable strain on public services, including healthcare, education, and housing, making it harder for everyone to access essential services. This view, while often criticized as divisive, pointed to the need for a balanced approach, one that considered the impact of immigration on existing communities and services, while still offering opportunities for migrants to build their lives in the UK. The question of whether migrants should be expected to integrate more quickly or whether the host society should do more to facilitate integration continued to generate heated debates. Some believed that immigrants should be encouraged to embrace British culture and values more readily, while others felt that the emphasis should be on creating a society where all cultures could coexist peacefully and respectfully. As the conversation moved forward, it became clear that there were no simple answers to these complex issues. Immigration and integration are inherently intertwined with questions of identity, economics, and social cohesion, and finding a solution that satisfies all parties requires careful thought, planning, and cooperation. Ultimately, the debate highlighted the need for an honest and open conversation about the challenges of integration, recognizing that while diversity brings undeniable benefits, it also requires deliberate efforts from both migrants and the host society to create a harmonious and inclusive future. The debate about immigration and integration has become increasingly polarized, particularly as communities grapple with the challenges of accommodating large numbers of newcomers. One of the most contentious issues is the tension between preserving national identity and embracing diversity. Many people argue that, in order for immigrants to successfully integrate into society, they must adopt certain aspects of the host country's culture and values. This view is rooted in the belief that integration is a two-way street, requiring not only the efforts of the immigrants, but also the willingness of the wider community to accept them. However, others argue that integration should not come at the cost of erasing cultural identities. They believe that multiculturalism, when approached with respect and open-mindedness, can enrich society rather than divide it. This perspective encourages the coexistence of various cultural traditions while still fostering unity under shared national values. In this climate, the discussion about integration has become heavily influenced by political narratives. Some political figures have used the issue of immigration to further their agendas, casting migrants as either a threat or an opportunity, depending on their stance. For those advocating for stricter immigration controls, the message often centers around the idea that unchecked migration undermines the country's values and strains public resources. This rhetoric tends to present immigrants as outsiders who must either assimilate fully or be considered a burden on the system. On the other hand, those supporting more open immigration policies argue that migrants bring valuable skills, cultural diversity, and fresh perspectives that benefit society in many ways. They emphasize the need for inclusive policies that allow immigrants to feel welcomed and empowered to contribute to the economy and society at large. These opposing viewpoints often lead to heated debates about how integration should be approached. Should immigrants be expected to fully embrace the culture of the host country, or should the host society be more flexible and accommodating, allowing for a more pluralistic approach? The answer is not clear-cut. Successful integration, many argue, involves finding a balance between respecting the rights and traditions of immigrants while ensuring they also embrace key aspects of the host society, such as the language, legal system, and civic responsibilities. Some suggest that programs focused on education, language acquisition, and community building can play a key role in helping migrants transition and contribute more fully to society. Others believe that the focus should be on fostering mutual understanding and respect, encouraging both immigrants and native citizens to learn from one another and work together to address shared challenges. Ultimately, the issue of integration touches on deeper questions about identity, belonging, and the future of multicultural societies. As the debate continues, it is essential to recognize that immigration is not just an issue of policy but of human connection. By creating spaces where dialogue can thrive and where differences are celebrated, societies can foster environments where everyone has the opportunity to belong, regardless of their background. The conversation about integration and immigration often highlights the deeper challenges faced by both new arrivals and the host society. One key issue is the balance between preserving national identity and fostering an inclusive environment where diverse cultures can thrive. The question of how much responsibility should fall on the immigrants to adapt to the host country's values versus the country's willingness to accommodate and understand immigrant cultures is a source of intense debate. Advocates for stricter integration policies argue that for a society to function harmoniously, newcomers must fully embrace the language, customs, and values of the host nation. This belief is rooted in the idea that shared cultural understanding fosters unity and social cohesion. On the other hand, proponents of multiculturalism advocate for a more inclusive approach, believing that diversity enriches society and should be embraced rather than eradicated. They argue that integration doesn't mean complete assimilation but a mutual exchange between cultures, where both the newcomers and the native population contribute to and learn from each other. In this light, integration becomes less about conformity and more about creating an environment where different cultures coexist, complementing one another. As the debate continues, it's clear that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The path to integration is multifaceted, requiring effort from both immigrants and the broader society to foster understanding, respect, and a shared sense of belonging. Whether through education, community programs, or open dialogue, the key to successful integration lies in recognizing the value that diverse perspectives bring to society. See you later.